Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Hello and welcome to the London part of the show. I'm Jo Coburn. Joining me for the duration, Karen Buck, Labour MP for Westminster North, and Andrew Rossendale, Conservative MP for Romford. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Now, I want to start with the speech the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn gave this week, in which he said that if he became Prime Minister, he would take on the City of London, saying finance should be the servant of industry, not the masters of us all. Karen Buck, is it wise for Labour to use such provocative language towards a sector that employs 350,000 people in London?
I think that absolutely I feel very strongly that the banking industry, the finance industry is essential to London's economy and essential to the national economy. So I very much support the need in our EU negotiations to have a healthy finance industry. But I don't think it's controversial either to say that the British economy has been too heavily balanced towards the finance sector and that we need to rebalance that, and that even, you know, now we're just kind of finally beginning to emerge after 10 years after the banking crisis. There's still a number of issues in the banking industry that need to be resolved.
But Jeremy Corbyn claimed the city had undue influence over politics which was pernicious and undemocratic. Is he right?
Well, I wouldn't use those words, and I mean I don't always have to use all of those words, but I think it's absolutely right that the finance industry hasn't always had the long-term investment interests of the wider British economy, particularly in manufacturing, that we need to see, and that's something that, I mean, George Osborne and David Cameron were saying as well. So whatever the words, I think the issue about balancing the British economy and making sure that finance is a servant of that is perfectly reasonable.
Andrew Rossendale, I mean, the Tories now can hardly claim to be a friend of the city because of the fears over passporting rights being lost in the City of London, and some bankers have said that they will move staff and operations if there are any risks to that in the future.
Well, we've heard all this for a long time and there's no real evidence that there's any substantial move away from the city.
But can you guarantee things like passporting rights?
There's no guarantee of anything because the negotiations haven't been completed. The reality is, though, that the European countries need the City of London for their own purposes as well. So I don't see that they're going to somehow punish the City of London. I think the City of London actually is getting more worried about the prospects of a Jeremy Corbyn government and how that would undermine our financial services industry. Right,
but would you say that actually there was too much deregulation in the past, supported by your government and also the previous Labour government?
I think both governments have deregulated. Certainly the eye was taken off the ball, which led to some of the problems we faced 10 years ago.
And you backed that?
Well, no party can say they're innocent when it comes to ensuring that that situation was dealt with at the time. There's no doubt about that. But let's be honest about it. Without the City of London, the income that brings into our economy is huge. The jobs it creates. I mean, the City of London effectively funds the entire National Health Service. So any policies that undermine the strength of the City of London will be cutting off our nose to spite our face.
Thank you. Now, there's going to be a major reform of local policing in London. The main change will see the merger of 32 borough commands into 12 larger units. Police officer numbers will likely also drop to 30,000 by April. So what will all this mean for day-to-day policing in London? Bhavani Vaddi reports.
These two young men were stabbed to death in Camden within the space of hours on Tuesday night. Rising knife crime is something the Metropolitan Police has to tackle in the face of severe financial pressures. 70% of the force's funding is from central government, with City Hall responsible for about 20%. The Home Office grant has remained the same at around £1.9 billion in the past few years. The Mayor says that represents funding cuts in real terms. So to help plug the shortfall, the Met is making major changes to local policing. The current 32 borough commands, where each council area has its own police team, will be merged to 12 command units, meaning a loss of 1,500 jobs.
And Londoners will see even fewer police officers. The Met expects numbers to drop below 30,000 by April, and that's the first time that's happened since 2003. And officer numbers could fall even further to around 27,000 by 2021. So what impact would all this have on policing the capital?
I think we're not at breaking point yet, but if we carry on in the way that they're talking about, I think within the next 18 to 20 months, the problems will be that we can't cope with incidents that are put in front of us. If we had, for instance, what we had last year with London Bridge, Westminster Bridge, Grenfell Tower, Finsbury Park, all these instances happening one after the other throughout the course of a year, at some stage, my colleagues are just going to be drained and not be able to deal with it.
On the same day as those murders in Camden, we were with officers searching for hidden knives in the neighbouring borough of Islington. The policing operations of Camden and Islington were brought together to test the idea of merging borough commands. Jessica Learmond-Creaky is the chair of a Safer Neighbourhood panel in that pilot area.
The impact of the merger has been quite stark. Those who suffer antisocial crime, low-level crime, know they are not safe. Those are areas where the Met are not bothering to investigate, they're not bothering to mount investigations, they just simply don't have the manpower. And that is a direct result of the pressure that they have through the cost cuts they have to make because of the underfunding by government and by the Mayor. It's a disaster for London.
The force needs to save £325 million by 2022 and has already cut £600 million from budgets in recent years, resulting in the loss of police officers and stations.
This is highly challenging. The reduction in numbers, the change in the pattern of demand, the current risk around terror and so on is undoubtedly, it's a huge challenge for the Met at the moment, and coupled with the financial challenge, it means we just have to think about doing some things differently. Our job is to make sure we are best able to protect London, both from the large-scale events and from the local needs, and that's what we're doing with this reorganisation.
It's really good to see you. How are you?
This week, Sadiq Khan committed an extra £110 million for the Met in the next financial year. He claims this means City Hall is paying a greater percentage of the Met's budget than ever before.
We hope that this will future-proof the Metropolitan Police Service for the coming years to enable them to deliver a better service with less resources.
In a statement, the Home Office said,
"The Mayor is accountable to the London public for police performance and is empowered to raise the council tax precept to increase funding for the Metropolitan Police. There is more money and more officers for each Londoner than anywhere else in the country."
The mergers will be rolled out across London over the next year. So will the Met be able to do more with less?
Well, I'm joined by Liberal Democrat peer, Lord Brian Paddick, a former Deputy Assistant Commissioner at the Met, who was once responsible for territorial policing across London's boroughs. Welcome to the programme.
Thanks, Chair.
Brian, as a former borough commander, how would you have felt taking over more than one borough under your control?
Well, it's extremely challenging. So, for example, they're going to merge Sutton, Bromley and Croydon. Sutton is Liberal Democrat, Bromley is Conservative, Croydon is Labour. Potentially different priorities of each different local authority. How, as one borough commander, can you manage those different demands?
But the politics aside, could you do it sort of physically and practically?
Well, when I was the borough commander for Lambeth, I struggled to be visible and to be an effective leader just with one borough, let alone over that enormous geographic area.
Right, but for the people who are being served by the Metropolitan Police, how will merging borough commands actually affect your ability to do your job?
Well, I think officers, because they're closing police stations, they're closing places from which officers are deployed, officers are going to have to travel longer distances to get to the places where they do their policing, whether it's reporting a crime or patrolling. So they're going to waste an awful amount of, a lot of time travelling from one place to another, time which they should be spending either visible on the street or investigating crime or caring for victims.
Andrew Rossendale, do you accept that police will no longer be as visible as they have been if you merge different borough commands?
Oh, absolutely. It's a catastrophe. What Sadiq Khan is doing to boroughs like Havering, for instance, is taking police off the streets in my constituency and sending them into Barking and Dagenham, into Redbridge. Now, the police don't know those areas from Havering. They're higher crime. So boroughs like Havering are going to really suffer through this policy.
But is that central government's fault? City Hall says since 2010-11, the Met's general grant funding from the government has fallen by more than £700 million, or nearly 40% in real terms. Why aren't you making representations to Theresa May's government?
There's more funding needed across the board. I accept that. But
Right.
the Mayor of London has the power to increase the precept. He's got reserves that he could use that he's refusing to use...
Well, he has given in extra money, hasn't he?
And the government giving him more money this year. So he has to be held to account for what he's doing to boroughs like Havering, which are hugely harmed by his policies.
Do you support the idea of merging borough commands?
I would rather not be faced with any of these pressures that we're dealing with as a consequence of the cuts in government grant.
Right,
I mean,
it's up to Sadiq Khan how he spends his money.
Yes, and what the Mayor is doing, and I have considerable sympathy for this, is looking at ways in which he can be sure that when you have huge cuts to the amount that you're able to spend, that you would have it spent on frontline policing rather than the management command structures and indeed some of the police stations. Now, in an ideal world, we wouldn't be dealing with the fact that we've lost £700 million and another £350 million to come, but that's the world we're in.
Who do you think is responsible for funding cuts facing the Met?
70% of the budget for the Met comes from central government. Central government is not increasing the amount given to the Met in line with inflation. Therefore, there is a real terms cut in terms of funding from central government. And it's not right to blame Sadiq Khan for the merger of these boroughs. That is an operational decision that has been made by senior officers in the Metropolitan Police Service in response to this significant cut in budget from central government.
Right, but actually the Mayor has said that the changes will offer better and more integrated local policing. On the one hand, he's blaming central government in the way that you have just done for reducing funding. On the other hand, he's saying by merging these borough commands, there'll be a more integrated local police service. Is that not correct?
Well, if you think that you've got one borough commander now in charge of 3 boroughs instead of in charge of 1 borough, you could say, well, there's going to be integrated leadership. But the fact is, there are not enough police officers to be able to do the job. They're going to be spread more thinly. They're going to be travelling longer distances. The public will see less police officers. There'll be less time to investigate crime.
Right. What would your solution be?
There has to be an increase in the amount of money provided by central government, which is why the Liberal Democrats at the last general election pledged an extra £1.2 billion for policing, more than any other party.
Right, and you were hurt on this issue, the Conservatives, in the general election. Do you accept that more money has to be found, or do you think that this is a case of the police always asking for more funds?
I do. I agree with Brian. Everything Brian has said is correct. Right. There does need to be more funding from central government, but the Mayor needs to do a lot more than he's doing, and it needs to be fairly resourced. So outer London boroughs simply get a raw deal from this. You know, as well as I do, that outer London is effectively funding inner London, and areas like Havering are not getting the resources we need to fight crime. We're seeing a massive increase in crime, but we don't have the resources to deal with it.
Right.
Well, I mean, it's not really a competition. I mean, we all need additional resources. But in Westminster, we've lost a third of our police since 2011. So, you know, there is a real pressure on inner London. And what we need is to make sure whatever scarce resources are available, they're going on the front line to the safer neighbourhood police and to the response teams, so that we can actually give some visible policing to people rather than spend more on command structures. I'd rather not have those choices. But if that is the choice, let's put money on the front line.
Do you accept, as a result of this move to merge borough commands and because of the reduction in funding, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner there in that film sort of implies something has to give. Do you think it's going to happen at that sort of low level, burglary, you know, antisocial behaviour? They're just not going to be investigated.
The truth is, under Sadiq, the crime has risen dramatically, particularly violent crime, and that's really frightening people across London.
That wasn't my question. Is something going to have to give in terms of what the police service is able to do?
You're right, clearly. To deal with the violent crime, which is what people are worried about, what we'll have to give is the low-level crime. But we all know that low-level crime leads to worse crime.
What we've seen, for example, in Norfolk, at one stage, was that police officers tend to gravitate to where the city is, to Norwich, leaving the rural areas denuded of police officers, to the extent that government had to step in and give more money for rural policing. There is a real danger, Bromley, Croydon and Sutton,
so
that the officers will gravitate towards Croydon because that's where the highest crime
and Havering towards Redbridge and Barking.
Do you think Londoners are being put at risk by this policy of Sadiq Khan?
I think if the money is, what money there is available is going onto frontline policing, then I don't see why that should be the case. I mean, what we've seen is that in the pilot combined areas, that there was an increase in response time. Response times improved. So in that respect, absolutely, it should not do it.
Right, but if there's been an increase in response times, then surely that's been a positive out of this, even though you say it shouldn't be a decision that had to be made as a result of funding.
Well, I think people are worried about whether these command structures should be merged, and there is an argument that says, you know, we would really really much rather have localised command. But what the police are saying to us is that they will get some advantage out of being able to pool the resources that are available in terms of resource policing.
I've really got to correct you again, Joe, because it's not Sadiq Khan's policy to merge boroughs. It is the Metropolitan Police Service's response to reduction in the amount of money that they're getting. That's what Sadiq Khan says. That's what the Metropolitan Police
But he
says.
supports it.
Well, he has no choice because he hasn't operational control of policing. It's an operational policing decision to merge boroughs. That's what the Commissioner has decided to do. Sadiq Khan has to accept that.
Brian Paddock, thank you. The NHS is something of a battleground in the Brexit debate, with Leavers promising more money for the NHS, while Remainers say Brexit threatens skilled workers the NHS depends on. That applies especially to nurses in London, as 10% of the capital's nurses are from the EU, double the proportion in the rest of the country. This week, the chair of the London Assembly's Health Committee called on the mayor and the government to offer them a cast-iron guarantee.
There are 5,000 nurses from the European Union working in London. We know that they're very concerned about what's happening, and I know that because of the impact of Brexit, less nurses are applying. For example, last year we've had 90% less residents of the EU applying to work in this country than beforehand. The Health Committee has written to the Mayor, and this is the fourth time we've written to the Mayor about this, that the Mayor should put pressure on the government that all those nurses, particularly in the NHS who are working, should be given the guarantee that they're safe here, their future is safe here. What they've said so far is that they have an agreement in principle that people working in this country should be all right after 29th of March 2019. That isn't good enough. In principle, isn't the same as a robust guarantee of their future. And people need certainty.
Here in the studio, I'm joined by Benel Bossou from the Royal College of Nursing and Alessandro Borca, who is a nurse originally from Italy. Welcome to both of you. Benel, first of all, what do you think is causing this nursing shortage in London?
We have a general shortage across London, over 7,000 vacancies of EU nationals, but we've got 14,000 vacancies across all of London. So 1 in 6 of our nursing posts are vacant in London, and that is not helped by the uncertainties for our EU colleagues as to whether they're going to have a long-term future in the NHS and in the UK.
You say it's not helped by that uncertainty, so what is the underlying reason, the other broader reason for this nursing shortage?
It's a complex issue, and it's something that has been going on over a number of years. I think that we're facing the results of poor planning over a long period of time around workforce. We've also got the situation that there's been resources taken out of the NHS, and on top of that, we've got reducing numbers of people who can come into the NHS from outside.
Well, Alessandro, you're somebody who came from Italy to work here, from the EU as a nurse. What are your concerns now, bearing in mind the government has said that the rights of EU citizens who have settled and are working in this country will be maintained?
Yes, of course, but the situation now is getting worse about NHS, and I've already seen some changement about my job. And
as a result of Brexit coming down, or as a result of general government policy towards the NHS?
No, as a result of Brexit and the vote of the referendum. Yes.
Why? What changes?
Because obviously people that came from, I'm not surprised that a lot of my colleagues, they want to come back to their previous original country. They came here to have a better future, to have a perspective of life, and to contribute to this country. And now, with this uncertainty, obviously, there is something that the government should be addressed.
And are you considering going back to Italy?
Well, I think that is something that I don't know, because obviously I want entitled to remain next year.
All right. I mean,
2000.
Andrew Rossendale, can the country really afford to lose nurses who've come from the EU originally?
No, but nobody is suggesting that we want to lose any NHS workers who come from the EU or any other country, and there's no reason why anyone should be afraid of that.
So can you give a cast iron guarantee?
Any EU citizen that's here will have the guaranteed rights, will have the right to remain. There's no issue. All that will happen is that in the future, if there are new NHS workers wanting to work in the UK, whether they're from the EU or the Caribbean or the Philippines or India, doesn't matter where they come from, they're going to be great workers, they will get a work permit and they will be welcomed here.
Does that reassure you? If you've got that promise from a politician, from the governing party, that your rights will be guaranteed, will that make you consider staying?
Well, I want fact because there is a lot of discussion about Brexit and what will be in the future, but it's something that we'll see.
Has made you nervous?
Yes.
I mean, is the problem, Andrew Rossendale, that the rhetoric, that some of the language, you're right to say that those rights are being guaranteed, that's what the government has said and Labour supports that, but in the end people don't trust what politicians are saying about it because of everything that's been said during the campaign. We
have to work with reality, and I say to Alessandra, you do a fantastic work for everybody in the National Health Service. We want everyone to stay, there's jobs here for you, and you have guaranteed rights. So whatever you read in the media, whatever politicians may say, the NHS, we value the work that foreign workers bring to our National Health Service, and that will continue. Whoever's in power, that will continue, and your rights will be guaranteed.
Right. I mean, Karen, it isn't just about Brexit and uncertainty, because, as we have stated, people's rights are guaranteed, certainly those up to March 2019. What about the broader issues affecting nursing, that it's just no longer as attractive a profession to go into because of a lack of funding and a lack of training?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, I think it is important to stress that however much there is a guarantee for the pre-March 2019 people, there is a lot of background scepticism about the process and about the background noise in which people are making that decision. And we're seeing this very clearly, not just in nursing, but in the recent figures that show what's happening to EU nationals coming to this country to work more generally. But then there is, as you say, the wider issue, the pressure on the health service, which is in the middle of its biggest financial squeeze since it was set up, but also, crucially, the failure to plan for the workforce and the introduction of the nurse bursaries. So we were promised, when the nursing bursary system was abolished, there would be 10,000 more applicants. In fact, there's been a 23% fall in applicants.
Just briefly, would that make a big difference in terms of nursing bursaries?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen it's a 33% drop-off that we've seen since the bursary was withdrawn. And we have real concerns about the future of nursing, because anything that impacts and creates a reduction in nursing creates problems around safe and effective delivery of care. And so we are really concerned about some of the issues around pay and the consequences of Brexit, etc.
All right, Bernal and Alessandro, thank you both very much. That's all we have time for, and thank you to my politicians too.
I've been